Alright, hello everyone. We get started. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Daniel Harvey. I'm the Artistic and Community Manager here at Opera Parallel. I'm not quite here, but for Opera Parallel. Firstly, thank you to our wonderful hosts at the Academy. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight. Really appreciate your partnership. So it is such a pleasure to be with you tonight for this conversation. This is part of our series of events that we've put together called Illuminating the Shining, which is all about this wonderful production we have coming up in a couple of weeks, finding ways to shine a little more light on The Shining and dig a little deeper into the themes that are really in this story, that go beyond what we all know and love from the film, but digging a little deeper into all of that. So the themes such as love, sacrifice, and ghosts, which not are things that you always associate with each other, but in Stephen King's world, they definitely go together. So for those of you who are new to Opera Parallel, we're a contemporary performance company based here in San Francisco that is all about telling relevant and engaging stories through music. And this event in particular is part of OP's community programs, which we call the Bullhorn, which reflects our aspiration to be a bullhorn for our community, and is inspired by the late San Francisco supervisor Harvey Milk. The Bullhorn is also designed to enhance our audience's experiences of our productions, allowing you to dive a little deeper into the stories you see in our stages. So tonight we're very fortunate to have three brilliant minds with us to guide us through the Overlook Hotel's corridors and explore the psychology and some of the lesser known themes of The Shining. We're going to go beyond Jack Nicholson breaking down the door with an axe to find out more about what really makes these characters tick and why audiences are still drawn to this story after so many years that it's been out. So I'm firstly going to quickly introduce one of our guests, and then we have a little musical performance to start the evening, and then I'll introduce everyone else.
Who's doing the music?
So Kirsten Piper Brown is fast becoming one of the most in-demand sopranos in contemporary opera, with recent performances with the Lyric Opera of Chicago, the Santa Fe Opera, and a star turn in intimate apparel at the Lincoln Center. Her next star turn will be right here in San Francisco as Wendy Torrance in Opera Parallel's new production of The Shining. I would also like to introduce who will be accompanying Kirsten over here on the piano, the amazing Kevin Korth. Take it away.
Thank you all so much. So I'm going to share a little bit, two excerpts. I'll share one a little bit later, so don't leave early. You're going to miss a good one. This first selection will be from Act 2 of The Shining, the second scene where Wendy is coming in to check on Danny. That's all I'm going to say. You'll have to just come to the opera to figure out what's going on in the story, okay? So this is from Act 2. Again, Wendy just coming in to check on Danny and making sure that he's okay.
If the rangers do
little more of that to come later on. But right now, I'd love to introduce the rest of our panel. So Katie Hafner is a journalist and author who was on staff at the New York Times for 10 years and remains a regular contributor. She is the author of 6 non-fiction books and is the host and co-executive producer of the popular podcast Lost Women of Science. Her first novel, The Boys, right here, was published in 2022. And Indre Viscontis is a neuroscientist, opera stage director, and science communicator across all mediums. Combining a passion for music with scientific curiosity, she is an associate professor of psychology at the University of San Francisco, where she runs the Creative Brain Lab, and is also the creative director of the Pasadena Opera. She is also, the many multi-hyphenates here, she's also, similar to Katie, the host of a popular science podcast called Inquiring Minds, as well as 2 others, one called Cadence, and the other one, remind me of the
Radiant Minds. I like the minds. World of Oliver Sacks.
And she's also appeared on national radio and television, including the Oprah Winfrey Show. So I feel like I'm in competition
Just
with
once,
Oprah here.
though. Just once on Oprah.
Sure. But, well, I hope I can meet that standard of the Oprah Winfrey Show here. So please join me in welcoming this amazing panel. So we're going to dive right in and talk about some of the psychology of these characters and some of the lesser-known themes of The Shining. So Paul Moravec, who's the composer of The Shining, says, he said in a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, that he thinks of this opera or of this story as a beautiful nightmare. That it is all about love, death, and power on steroids. And Mark Campbell, who's the librettist for the opera, says that The Shining ends on a hopeful note, which it earns. And its central theme is that only a powerful love will end generations of child abuse. So these are not themes that you necessarily would always associate with The Shining, particularly from the film, or with horror stories in general. So I want to dig into that a little more. So Katie, I'm going to start with you. So your book, The Boys, shares some similarities to The Shining. It has been called a well-plotted thriller. It deals with themes of isolation, family dynamics, and takes inspiration from other horror stories, I believe, like The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
So the relationship between your protagonist, Ethan, and his 2 foster kids is central to your story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you explored those dynamics in your book, and how this plays into the suspense and thriller of it all?
Right, and Andre is going to help me explain. Is this on? Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I didn't, so I'm a reporter, I'm a journalist. I did not set out to write a book of fiction, but my daughter and I went on a bike trip a few years ago, and we were talking to, this is one of those high-end bike trips where your only job is to ride your bike, and then they do everything else for you. And so I'd always wanted to do that. We went to, we did Stockholm to Copenhagen, and one night at dinner I was asking one of the guides, like, what do you do if there's a problem guest? And, because it's this kind of intimate thing that happens, you're not intimate, you know what I mean? So he said, well, actually, they're told never to come back. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, what are some examples? And so he told this story of something truly bizarre that had happened on one of these trips. And my daughter turned to me and she said, Mom, that's a novel. And I said, that's great, someone will write that. So luckily, my agent didn't say, Katie, stay in your lane. He said, fiction, sure, why not? But it turns out that it's not a thriller in the sense that The Shining is a thriller. It's a thriller in the sense much more like The Sixth Sense is a thriller in that there is a huge plot twist. I mean, a huge reveal that I don't reveal until the middle of the book. And people are, with almost no exceptions, completely shocked. And so when I decided to write something like that with that kind of suspense, my husband, bless his heart, said, well, you have to watch The Sixth Sense, because they do. How many people have actually seen The Sixth Sense? Oh, wow. Okay, so it's masterful what they do with that movie. And so there are clues absolutely everywhere. And in fact, Hidden Brain devoted an entire episode, you should write this down, it's called Surprise Endings, about what it is that our brain is doing to square ourselves with things that don't seem right. So even though I drop all these clues, The Sixth Sense drops all these clues, your brain is working on something that psychologists call availability bias, where what you do is, okay, I'm going to let you know.
Oh, okay. I mean, you're doing a great job. But, I kind of use this idea that, Daniel Kahneman suggested, if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow, that we essentially have two systems in our brain. We have our fast-thinking, intuitive, gut-feeling brain, which makes decisions on the fly, and that's not consciously available to us what this part of our brain is doing. And by the way, it's like 80% of what your brain does is not available to you consciously. But we feel as if we are in control, because our conscious brain, the slow thinking brain, is deliberate and thoughtful. And we feel like all of our actions are, we chose to do this, etc. But we don't realize that the slow thinking brain is incredibly lazy. And if the fast thinking brain puts up a plausible explanation or a plausible solution to a problem, the slow thinking brain says, aha, I deliberately thought of that solution through this, slow process of rational thought, and it's just not true. So the availability bias is one consequence that, if you can bring to mind lots of examples of something, you will think that that is more dangerous. A great example of this is people who think that going on an airplane is very dangerous, because we hear much more about airplane crashes than we do about car crashes. And you probably all know that the drive to the airport is the most dangerous part of your flight, right? But availability bias, the way we sort of think, oh, but it's just much more disastrous. So when that turbulence hits, we think, oh, this is going to be really dangerous. So yeah, that's availability bias.
So even though there are all these clues, the availability bias kicks in, and you choose, I guess it's your unconscious brain that chooses not to explore your skepticism. And so when people read The Boys, I can't tell you how many people read this book 1.5 times because they go back to the first half and look for the clues, and they're like, but the trick is that they're not mad. You don't want to piss them off, so they're not mad. And it's just like The Sixth Sense. At the end, it's like, oh, right. And in a way, you're delighted. I hope. Anyway, so did that answer anything? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I actually have a theory that about Wendy in The Shining, which I would love your thoughts on. That Wendy is operating with a big old chunk of availability bias, particularly in the beginning when Jack takes the family off to Colorado and moves into this remote hotel and decides, and they all believe that that's going to fix all their problems. Obviously, the Overlook Hotel and Stephen King has other plans for them. But what do you think about that, and how you've been developing this character in that? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sometimes I just want to comment on this availability bias. Sometimes when I try to understand something, I become my grandmother because she always would use the term, "You have plenty sense, Kirsten. You just have plenty sense." And so I think about that slow brain, that having plenty of sense and knowing how to make those calculated moves instead of that 80%. But so Daniel, when I think about Wendy, we are trying to build this the beginning of the show to be hopeful. At least I am. I think I don't want people to see the end, just in case there are people who don't know the story. I don't want them to know what's going to happen. I want them to see love. I want them to see the hope. I want them to not see what Wendy already knows are the clues that are all around, especially when it comes to protecting her son. But she does think that, or she just has this hope that this time at this, well, I think could be a beautiful romantic story, right? Of, a family together, hunkered down, right? It could be beautiful, right? But I think she is trying to ignore all those clues and all of those hints, and just trying to go with Jack and what he also thinks he will be able to fix, and he's trying to get away from the past and his mistakes, and just hoping that Wendy rides along.
Well, and just from what you sang, right?
Oh yeah, it'll be. Oh yeah, he did just say that, and I already know it's not okay.
I think that's an interesting consequence of the fact that we have this delusion that we are in control at all times, because we think that people can change like that. Oh, you just have to want to change, and then you can change, and it's fine. We don't realize how much of our actions, how much of even our perceptions of how we interpret the world are based on our habits and our experience. This is one of the reasons why I'm not worried about a sentient artificial intelligence, because maybe I should be worried as I'm saying this, because the way you make an intelligence sentient is through experience. So you need to build up that set of experiences, because that's really what, essentially forms our brains, shapes our brains.
Absolutely. I'd love to dive a little more into the similarities and maybe they're not that many, but the particularly between Ethan and Jack.
I object.
Please do. Well, basing this on from the New York Times review of your book, they said that they described Ethan's character as grieving and trying to build human connections through only avenues he can understand, which to me kind of sounds a little bit like Jack in some ways.
Right, but can we talk about how the grief manifests?
Sure.
Ethan, I don't want you guys to get totally creeped out by the voice. So, Ethan is totally sympathetic. He's very geeky. He's very awkward. He's pretty much on the spectrum. He's very endearing, wouldn't you say? Yeah. And so I covered technology for the Times for a really, really long time, and I know all these people from the Valley, and so I wanted Ethan to, he grew up speaking Fortran with his mother. I mean, and so Jack, that is not a similarity. However, the trauma, what I can say is that the way that it is that trauma, it sits with us, and then it gets triggered, right? And so Barb is his wife, is Ethan's wife, and she has a theory that it's this thing called the anniversary reaction, that, so his parents, I'm not ruining the plot by telling you that his parents died when he was 8, and Barb, his wife, who's a psychologist, has this theory that, and they were 38 when they died, that when Ethan reaches the age, and this is actually a real thing, that the anniversary reaction and trauma, that when he reaches the age of 38, he's gonna, I don't know, like spontaneously combust or something like that. And so there's that. What she's getting at there is that there's a trigger. And so I think there's that. Would you say that that's a similarity? Yeah.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to dive into a little more of the psychology behind that, and sort of why humans have those reactions and triggers.
Yeah, we're learning a lot more about how much of our trauma has deep impacts, not only in terms of how then we process the world, but just how we interpret the world. And I'm going to let you in onto a little secret that some neuroscientists still can't let go of, which is there's no such thing as the reptilian brain. This idea that our emotions are primitive and somehow our rational minds are more evolved is total bullshit. Because our emotions are highly constructed, they are highly evolved, they are multiply represented in many different brain networks. And this is actually one of the reasons why we find horror so fun, why we actually seek out fear. It's because we can control our emotional reaction to that fear by changing how we interpret the context. Because if you were actually actually in a hotel and someone was bringing an axe to the door, it would not be fun. But you know you are not there. You are in an opera house or a theater. And so you can enjoy this nervous system reaction and know you are safe. And when you think about what that nervous system reaction is, it's the same series of hormones and neurotransmitters and heart, physiological changes, heart racing, etc., that we get when we fall in love, that we get excited about things. And it's actually, it's how you label the feeling that can turn it from fear to excitement. But of course, that also is not entirely, that we can't just do that voluntarily, right? It comes from this experience. And when you have trauma, sometimes those feelings can come up. And, if you've dampened them down and you dampen them down, you can't just reason your way out of it. Actually, this is one of the reasons I'm really excited about a lot of these psychedelic therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder, because it actually allows you to be in a completely different state of mind, work through some of those traumatic experiences, and actually have a healing experience. But that's a totally different topic. But yeah, I think that's one of the exciting things for me is that this notion that actually emotions are highly evolved, highly complex, really fascinating, at the highest level of what we are at humans, not this reptilian, primitive, whatever.
Kirsten, to bring you in on this, you're a mother of 2 boys yourself, and how does that influence your performance in a piece like this, which is so much about that mother-son relationship? And talking about the psychology behind that and how you're interpreting that as well.
Yeah, I would say as an artist, it's really wonderful to have young professional artists in the room working with you, especially as I'm, away from home, missing my own children who just left this morning, and I got a chance to meet my work children. I would say I just want to pivot and just say, as an artist, it's so fulfilling to be able to bring my real persona into a work, especially in an industry where sometimes I have to mute being a family person, being a mother, and having those instincts. But I do believe that it makes me a better artist. And just having our young professionals in the room, I do feel like I'm mothering them sometimes, even from afar. Sometimes I'm just giving them thumbs up, yeah, you can do that. But it's so wonderful to be able to embrace the character who I can naturally just be, where I can naturally tap into personally. Because sometimes you do have to kind of separate yourself, your personal from the character. And this one is, I end up, kind of oh, Kirsten, that's not really your kid. But I love that, the fact that, I sometimes, the way that I am probably like Wendy's, I want to protect my sons from all harm and danger. Fortunately, my husband is not much of a danger, but that's one thing that Wendy is very cautious about, the history that Jack and Danny have, and she's trying to be cautious in allowing Jack to kind of, repair that, and she's actually maybe even a little jealous that Danny wants to spend so much time with Jack. Danny wants to spend time with his father. He's waiting outside for me. Everything's about, and she stays with Jack, I think, because of Danny. She doesn't want to disappoint him. And so I think she's trying her best to be, me, Kirsten, I have my limits, what I'm gonna do. But I think Wendy is going, as far as she can go. And we were just talking today about some of the motivation behind why Wendy, even at the end of Act 1 of this opera, why is she still there? Act 2, she's still, affirming Jack to Danny and saying, well, this is what we're gonna do. What I just said, we're gonna go fishing, we're gonna get in a boat. She knows that's not gonna happen. But you wanna be that cheerleader for your children. You wanna be, you don't wanna be all doom and gloom.
Can we talk a little more about the idea of sacrifice in this story? again, it's not one that is often associated with The Shining. But in the novel and the opera that we're performing, definitely comes through a lot more of that. Jack, in many ways, does make the ultimate sacrifice for his family. And yeah, could you maybe talk about that from your character's point of view, and Indra, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, hey, y'all should come. Did anyone come to the rehearsal on Saturday? Okay. And these are some of the conversations that we have. Brian, there you are. Hi. We were talking today about why didn't she just kill him? You know, why haven't they run off? And I think she. Again, I don't think she wants to disappoint her son. She doesn't want to be the one to do that, and she wants the best experience and the best life for Danny. And I think she's making, I'm not going to say bad decision. She's making the decision she needs to make. But I think that she wants to keep giving Jack all these chances, and she just. At some point, she is kind of like, all right, we're going to get out of here, because she knows that it's just going to be, at some point, I think she makes a decision that I am no longer going to facilitate this family staying together. I'm not going to think that, Jack is going to change. And, she does, actively try to, leave before she and Danny both die. But I think she's still sympathetic, even after when they get, up to May, and she knows that Danny misses his daddy, and I think she still wants to acknowledge that and coddle that a little bit. Did that answer your question? I feel like I went way too.
Yeah, I mean, I might just add that there's sort of like two forces that I see here at work. One is the fact that Mother Nature selected for hope and positivity. We actually have a lot of health benefits that we see from people who are optimists. I mean, there are all kinds of, this is one of the reasons why, people who pray and who are religious, have these health outcomes that we can measure and show, there's an effect here. So somehow, that has made it, has been selected for in evolution. But then there's another one too, which is that children need more than one caregiver if they can get it. And so when, they will forgive their parents, or they will forgive the people that they see as their own caregivers over and over and over again, because there is this deep-seated need to be loved. And oftentimes you'll see this pattern in families, which seems unfortunate, but you can imagine that in a case in which a child's survival depends on more than one individual helping them, makes sense, which is that the parent who is actually doing all of the caregiving, actually giving them all of the love, is the one that has less of an influence on the child than the parent who is either hot and cold or just cold, but where there seems to be a potential for that person to be a caregiver. The child will go and seek out that caregiver's love and appreciation, and this is the deep-seated, problem that a lot of us face with our relationships with our parents. So I think that there's this, but to me what's really interesting too is that it suggests that there is this selection for connection and love. And so that also gives me hope, that there's this other underlying theme that one of the most important things that can come out of this is that we recognize that the connection between each other, that love really is a really fundamental human characteristic, and it's really important. And so when the dad realizes, or Jack, or realizes that he just can't get over his demons. He can't get over those habits that he has formed in his thinking. You can think of it as however you want to psychoanalyze it, but he just realizes that he cannot overcome those demons, and yet he still has love, because he decides that he's going to sacrifice himself. Am I spoiling the ending here? No. Sorry about that.
Sorry. So I want to shift gears a little bit to talk a little bit about recreational fear, the concept of recreational fear. I think it is one of the reasons why The Shining is still so popular today. There's actually a whole, of course it's in Denmark, but there's a whole lab that studies this, the recreational fear lab in Aarhus, Denmark, and they hypothesize that recreational fear is a form of play behavior. And that when we play, we learn things, and we learn important things about physical and social interactions, and how we engage with the world.
So I'll start with that, but I really want to hear what Katie has to say about this too. I mean, this is the whole, this is why theater is thousands of years old, right? We see things play out on stage, and then that gives us clues as to how we should interact and what are the consequences of our behaviors, what are the consequences of other people's actions. But we also feel catharsis, right? This whole sense that, we can go on this emotional journey, and if we find some closure, that is comforting, because that means that, we can take that knowledge, and when we are faced with this in real life, IRL, we know how to handle it. But to me, Katie, I'm really interested in thinking about sort of the kind of narrative structure of how you capitalize on the fact that people enjoy the suspense. Like, we like that.
Well, they don't know there's suspense. They just get impatient. In fact, some people say, "What is this?" And a few people, I talk to a lot of book groups. If you'd ever like to talk to yours, I'd be happy to. And I was just at one the other night, and I said, "Listen, just be honest with me. Did you want to put the book down?" And one woman said, "I sure did." She was so angry. She just was confused and angry, and so that she didn't know that that I was actually. It's a very different phenomenon when there's a reveal that just makes you feel unsettled while everything just feels strange in the book, versus when but talking about recreational fear, I have to tell you, just completely off the subject of the boys, we live across the street, we're in Noe Valley, we live across the street from the Alvarado Elementary School, and I love the screaming so much on the playground, because these kids, I'm thinking to myself, they're really screaming, and it's because they're scared, they're not scared, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, we build amusement parks that are literally designed, and people pay hundreds of dollars to be completely freaked out of their minds. That little roller coaster, it's all designed to make you feel this maximum fear. I mean, I think from a neuroscience perspective, it's because your autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that controls all of your organs outside of your brain, although it's connected to your brain obviously, is divided up into two branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which we call flight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. And these two systems are in balance with one another, such that when you go into peak fight or flight, you're going to have a parasympathetic rebound. This is one of the reasons why I say this is why Olympic athletes cry on the podium, because they've just had this big sympathetic fight or flight response. They get this rebound, so it's like exactly the opposite reaction. But one of the things that happens in parasympathetic rebound is that you get a feeling of comfort, and it's so pleasurable. It's the same thing that after a good cry. What happens, you feel better about it, literally, because of the interaction of these two nervous systems. And actually, this is one of the ways in which I teach singers to deal with their performance anxiety, because you are not going to die from being fight or flight. Eventually, the parasympathetic rebound is going to kick in. But if you go out on stage and you keep that sympathetic nervous system at bay this whole time, you're going to get tenser and tenser and tenser, and it's all going to come up here. But if you just let it wash over you right before you go on stage, you're going to go on stage in the parasympathetic rebound condition, and that's like a great place to perform from. So I think that's one of the reasons, is that we remember the parasympathetic rebound part of it. Remember, at the end of the roller coaster ride, we think, oh my God, that was so much fun, let's do it again. You don't say, it's like in the moment when you're like, why the hell am I in this thing? You don't feel that way. And I totally thought I understood this, and then with my kids, I was like, we're going to take, and then I have a 9-year-old boy who has such big emotions that he looks at those things and he's like, people are crazy. I don't understand why anybody would put themselves through that. So I do think we're also recognizing that the way in which these two branches of the nervous system actually affect our bodies is a spectrum. Like, some people like horror movies, and some people hate horror movies. They hate that feeling, and I think that part of it is just like everything else. There's a spectrum here of how it makes us feel.
Yeah. Kids, is that something you can relate to as a performer with the stage fright or anything like that?
Oh yeah, and I'm one of those, I hate horror movies and horror books or anything.
Oh no!
No, I don't. I'm sorry. Don't tell anyone else. I stayed away from anything Stephen King. You know, I read one horror book before The Shining, and that was called, what was that called? Falling Angel by William Würzburg, I think. I think there was a Robert De Niro, there's a movie about Robert De Niro played like this falling angel. It's like, and I only read that because I had to do the opera. So that's why I read The Shining. But yeah, I don't like that feeling. But maybe because I'm an opera singer that specializes in new works. So I get that feeling from, you know, opening up the score for the first time and saying, what the heck is this? So that's where I fulfill all of that, and I don't have to read horror books or watch movies, right? Because I go to the first day of rehearsal.
So,
But, no, go ahead.
are you going to throw it up for questions? Because I have a question for
Please,
Kirsten.
please,
May I
go
ask?
ahead.
So I'm just so curious, The Shining is, there's, as we've established, there's so much emotional complexity. How do you, like, from what you're saying, I mean, how do you bring that to your voice?
Right. So what you were talking about, the sympathetic and parasympathetic and dealing with performance anxiety, I feel like with me, and Brian, you may experience this, I did this a lot when I did Intimate Apparel at Lincoln Center. It was the longest rehearsal process. I was like, when are we going to be done rehearsing? But I just started going to the edge, vocally, emotionally, because I didn't want to be frightened to do it. And it was such an intimate piece that, and literally people were right here and I'm like singing, and I was like, okay, if you're going to be right there, you're going to get all of this. And I recommended that people not bring children who were not emotionally, mature, because I literally, my goal was to make you feel everything that Esther was feeling. And so I had to go to the edge of many of my scenes. I had to break down and cry and take a half-hour break so Kirsten can get herself back together. But that helped me to not be afraid when I went out there, and I felt good. Like after I would go to the edge in a scene and I'd come back to it, I felt like, oh, I'm cruising now, and then I can do, maybe I can do it in the next scene. Maybe I can, really push the boundaries of where I feel comfortable, of what feels, of like even bending what is real and what is not. Like looking at, my colleagues and saying, and they're not, my friends. We are these characters. Like, what is it like to really have this fight? What does it feel like to really push you? And of course, we're all being very safe, but to feel anger, to feel intense love. And so I like to try that with my colleagues who are okay doing that, and when I have time to do it in a process. And I think that kind of helps me to settle in. And I'm not afraid to just to give. But if I haven't done that, if I haven't gone to the edge, I'm afraid of getting out there. So I have to do that in the rehearsal process. Make sure I cry.
So I'm going to shift a little bit again, coming close to our time a little bit, but I would love to talk a little bit about why music and opera is the perfect medium for this kind of story. It may not seem necessarily like horror and opera are happy friends, but they actually are. And Mark Campbell, actually, who's librettist, he mentioned in our conversation the other day that he believes opera is the best form for this kind of story because music is an abstract art form, and it's very difficult to convey a lot of the themes in The Shining, the mental instability, the violence, and those sort of things. It's just words alone. So the music allows us to take it to another place. And I understand in your book, Katie, that there is a few moments where music plays a pivotal sort of role in that storytelling as well.
Yeah, music is, I feel very passionately about music in my own life, and so music plays a pivotal role in Ethan, in the second, they stumble into a church in Italy, and there's this choir doing choir practice, and I took this, I've always admired a J.D. Salinger story called For Esme with Love and Squalor, where there's this little girl in choir. Let's just forget for a minute the pedophilia part of Salinger, but anyway, so there's this little girl, Esme, and and he's taken with her, and I thought, what a wonderful way to convey something super emotional with something sung, which releases something in Ethan. So I chose the Ave Verum, and then there's just this little boy who takes the choir stops, and he takes, and he's 8, which is an important age in the book for various reasons, and he just takes it and flies with it, and that opens up the floodgates for Ethan. And so music, even though this is prose, and I would love to, like we just put together, the publisher just put together a book club kit, and it's for the paperback, which just came out, and I had to come up with a playlist, and so Ave Verum, of course, is in there, and Gabriel's Oboe is another really important piece of music, but with prose, when you can't hear it, like the book I did on Glenn Gould and his love affair with his piano, for the audio version, I really wanted to be able to use little excerpts, and Sony, of course, said, that'll cost you $2 million. So, and I thought, maybe can I do like a cover? So I guess not, but it's really hard when you're writing a book to convey the importance of the music to the story.
Well, now you can just get GPT-4 to do it. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think opera is the ultimate art form. I mean, that's why I devoted so much of my life to it. And one of the reasons, I think, is because, for one thing, it's the place to tell big stories, big emotions, big sets, big mythical, the stories of great stories of humanity. And I think there are 2 reasons. One is that one of the reasons why music is so powerful in terms of moving us, moving our emotions, is because when you look at the brains of people that are listening to music that is moving them, they are mirroring the brains of the performers in terms of the tempo fluctuations, the emotional, the dynamics. You can actually see, if I played you a movie of brain activity of a person listening to a Chopin etude, you could tell where we were in the music on the basis of what that brain activity looked like. And I think that's one of the reasons why music is such a powerful tool to put ourselves into each other's shoes. I mean, I think it predated language, and we can talk about that at a different time. But I think that that's how we understand each other, because we literally synchronize our breathing rates, our brain waves, the oscillations, and that's how we learn what it's like to be in each other's shoes. And so that's one of the reasons why it makes us feel so connected to one another. When you're in sync with one another, you literally, oxytocin, which is the love hormone, those levels rise, and you bounce babies in sync, and they're more likely to hug you than they are if you bounce them out of sync and you're a stranger. So there's all these ways in which that connects us. But then in opera, you add the visual. You put them into this beautiful artistic vision, and so you're not just like, listening, you are there in that place with those people. And it gives you, I think it gives you real permission to empathize with the characters, figure out what it's like to be in their shoes, but then you also have the director's vision, the designer's vision, and all of that, in service to the story. I mean, there's nothing better, is there? Really, there isn't.
That's why we do it. Yeah. Kirsten, have you experienced anything like that in your films? I imagine something like Intimate Apparel, which was in a very intimate space.
Yeah.
You could have really felt that from your audience.
Yeah, I would say that, and also just what was interesting is that many audience members who bought tickets to Intimate Apparel, like I said, or theater, didn't know they were coming to see an opera. They thought they were coming to see the play. Because operas aren't normally done at Lincoln Center Theater and the Mid-City Mouse Theater, and so to hear their reactions was so that, oh, I heard voices, and I said, what's going on? I looked back through the, and I saw Lynn Nottage's name, and then who's this Ricky and Gordon guy? And so it was just interesting what they got out of it. And so I did kind of interview people, like, well, what did you think? They're like, well, I never thought I could experience the story in such a heightened way, and talking to Lynn, she did say that when she wrote the play, she thought it felt like an opera to her. And then she and Ricky went, through a couple of years of trying to find material. And she had written, Intimate Apparel about 10 years prior, and then Ricky comes back and says, this is it, why didn't you show me this one? But I think a story I think the story like The Shining is so great to present in an opera because it's such a popular, piece. I've been inviting people all around town to The Shining, and you normally when I invite someone to the opera, if I'm in a restaurant and they're not that excited, like, oh, you want to come see La Boheme? Sure, And when I show them, like, oh, you want to come see me in an opera? They're like, sure. They're like, do you want to know what the opera is? Yeah, it's The Shining. They're like, what? So they're so excited. So it's just another way to experience this popular story, and I'm just excited to hear from the audience and, about how they experience The Shining, especially those who read the book and watched the movie. And it's so interesting what you talked about, how you can follow where people are in the show that A2, because I always wondered, in people's brains, are they getting the same thing out of, because I feel like the composer could write something and mean it to be one thing, but perhaps individuals could receive something else. And they do. And also depending on who is singing or who is performing. So that was interesting.
You're absolutely right. The performer matters very much, and there are some people who are better able to signpost for the audience or to show that, or to do that. And it also, the audience's experience, this is why it's so great that you are all here, because knowing a little bit of background about what you're about to see informs how your brain interprets it. And often it doesn't take a lot, even a 30-minute pre-concert talk can make a huge difference in terms of what your brain pays attention to, what connections it sees, and how well it's able to lock in to that experience.
Absolutely. And it sounds like there maybe needs to be an operatic adaptation of The Boys. It seems like everything seems right for it. So I have one final question for each of you. Just a quick answer before we throw it open to the audience for some questions, and then we'll have another little musical moment. So why do you think it is that stories like The Shining continue to captivate people still today? It's been around since the 70s. People still are obsessed. Why is that?
It's just, like I said, like a pop culture, everybody loves the story for different reasons, and I just think that, this is a great vehicle to bring new audiences to opera. Thank you, Opera Panel. But to give them a take on a story that they already know, and to just give them a different experience, and I think that's what's going to draw audiences to this piece, hopefully.
I think, The Shining, Jack Nicholson, Stephen King, these are masters of their domain. So that's part of it. I think people recognize that. But I also think there's a universal truth here. And I think if there wasn't that universal truth, then people would stop, would stop being interesting. But there is.
I just think it's just incredible storytelling. If you look at the way this thing is crafted.
Absolutely. That's why it makes great opera too. It's the foundation of it all. Yeah. Thank you. So to throw it open to all of you, any questions for the group? Jeremy?
Oh, sorry. I feel like the biggest similarity for me between The Boys, which I love, and The Shining, which I also love, is that they both play out in isolation because of COVID in the Boys, and because they're stuck in a hotel. The Shining, and I wonder what role from your perspective, does that play? Does it magnify all the human emotions, that it allows the people to focus perhaps too intently on each other and on themselves? And since we've all just been through that for a few years, is that a phenomenon that's affected all of us? And are there lasting repercussions? I I know it's a big question, but I feel like alienation is the obvious, for me at least, crossover theme.
So Ethan he's a recluse by nature, and so of course COVID reinforced that, and not in a good way. And so when they adopt these two boys, Tommy and Sam, right before COVID, and the book, by the way, it's not a COVID book, don't worry, you don't have to relive that. It's just COVID, it's kind of like a part of the backdrop. And Barb, it turns out, she's a psychologist who specializes in this idea of loneliness. She studies loneliness and social isolation among older adults, which is something I spent a long time, like 6 months when I was working on a story for the Times about 5 years ago on this very topic, and it's a real thing. And so then she becomes kind of this superstar during COVID, and Ethan becomes more and more reclusive, and more attentive toward the boys. And then there's this kind of all I can say is harrowing scene when he goes to the grocery store and freaks out because there's someone kind of spitting on the bok choy. And that happened to all of us. So all of us, I think, panicked at the very beginning. Remember when the grocery store had that one? So that happened to me. My husband wanted bok choy, so I ran out there, went to Whole Foods, stood in that line. You had to stand in that line and then go one way down the aisle. And then all I wanted was the bok choy, and there was this man who wasn't even wearing a mask, or not really, and he was kind of spitting, and I actually freaked out, and I thought there is not much separating what happened to me and my sense of isolation, and Ethan, who really kind of goes over the edge into a full-blown, I won't spoil it, but yeah, and I think in The Shining it's very similar.
Yeah, I think from a theatrical perspective, the isolation puts the lens on the relationships between the human beings.
Right.
And I think, because that's essentially all there is, so that's what we pay attention to, but it also, we are fascinated by other people. This is why gossip is gossip, right? We love to hear about other people, about what they're doing and what they're feeling, and so, I think as a theatrical device, to give people this intimate look into how people react behind closed doors is a kind of there's a bit of a peeping Tom, titillation about it, but we are fascinated by it. And when we go to the theater now we're allowed to see what happens behind those doors. I think that's one of the reasons why it's a compelling device.
Yes.
What's the genius of Stephen King?
So many things.
We'll start with one.
No, you, the psychologist.
Oh, me. I mean, so I've read mainly. I stay away from his horror. I mainly read sort of just the long form narrative. I don't know if you call them suspense, maybe, but not necessarily horror. And so to me, one of the things that he does really well is that he taps into our narrative thinking. There's this whole idea that somehow logical thinking is superior to even just narrative thinking. Like if you talk to other scientists and you say you gotta make a story, they're like, well, that's a dirty word, right? Like, I know, I'm just gonna be logical and I'm just gonna use statistics and, but it turns out that actually narrative thinking is a very kind of highly, a complex way in which we make sense of the world, and we use it for everything, including how we remember things. We attach them to a story, and so we remember our past in terms of how it fits into a particular story. And I think what the genius of Stephen King is that he is able to create these very complex stories that still make sense within a narrative structure, so it's very satisfying. It's not like, you can, just the way that you can tell when a performer is putting on a show, rather, really in the moment and really present. We were so attuned to that, which is fascinating to me. Or you can tell whether someone's really paying attention to you or really thinking about their grocery list. We can tell that in the eyes. In the same way, we can tell when an author didn't have a good idea and just plopped a surprise out there out of nowhere, right? Because they didn't have this full plan. That's never the case with Stephen King.
I will say that in the book, I really enjoyed the journey of the characters, and especially Jack, and getting the history. And and bringing that into into Wendy's relationship with Jack. That, you know, she's not this, you know, just like subservient woman in the 70s, that she, you know, she has, you know, her own thing going, had her own thing going on, but I think that history feeds why she's, because that's the thing, you know, as a logical person, I guess, I'm like, why is she here? Why are we still doing this? But I think it's, and this is what I love about the opera, is that we have an opportunity, you will have an opportunity to really witness and see and experience the love that is between Wendy and Jack and the whole family, but really see, you know, why Wendy. I think I want to answer that question, and I think that's what I work on rehearsal with all the scenes, like, why is she here? Why is she doing this? And so I want to make sure that, you know, the audience understands her and why she was there until she just couldn't be there.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap up the conversation part there, but we have one more little musical moment from Kirsten. You can sing now. So thank you, Kirsten, and again, with Kevin Ford.
So this next excerpt comes from Act 1. We're going to go backwards. And we're going to talk about, I just spoke about the love that Wendy has for Jack. And in this aria, she's kind of just observing from the side. She's just seen, read a bedtime story to Danny, and she witnesses this very tender moment between Jack and Danny, and you know, she says, I never stopped loving you. Even though times were hard, even though they needed to be here, like they need to be at the Overlook to repair their marriage, to start over. Like I think both Jack and Wendy know that this place represents almost like the last hope for their relationship. So I'll give you a little bit of that piece. I never stopped when you lost your job, when you went around, when life had time to end. I never stopped loving you. Not once. And now that love is rewarding us, paying us back with moments like this. Moments like this, when life just seems to rise right up and
So Opera Parallel is performing The Shining June 2nd to 4th at the Overwinter Center for the Arts, and tickets are available online at operaparallel.org/The Shining. Also want to give a quick plug, on the back of your programs you'll see a little ad for another program that Opera Parallel presents called Expansive. You're actually getting the scoop on this, it's officially being announced tomorrow, but this is a partnership that we have with the Transgender District, which is an amazing organization downtown in the Tenderloin. We started working with them last year to present a showcase called Expansive for transgender and non-binary singers. And we'll be bringing that back again for the second year, bigger and better, at the ACT Strand Theatre on August 3 and 4. We have 3 amazing artists who will be joining us. Catherine Goforth, who just won a new award from the Washington National Opera called the True Voice Award for transgender singers, and a harpist from Detroit named Aya Simone, and a local favorite, Nicola Prince, will be joining us as well and doing some amazing aerial performance while singing opera. Because people do that apparently. So, so we hope to see one of those things, if not both. And yeah, thank you so much for being here tonight.